Hey everyone, Brandflakes here, back with a new Chaos Hero Nightmare video. Today's video is releasing a lot later than it probably should, and I'm cutting it really close to Anime Expo, so I wanted to kind of restart my YouTube channel videos with a bit more editing, but I procrastinated too much. There was, getting acclimated to my real life job, and then playing a lot of Great Blue Fantasy's Guild Wars that got in the way of making this video, and also just wanting to play Tenebria a bit more before I made a video on her. And so this is going to be my comprehensive analysis of Tenebria, and she is our universe's greatest idol.
Time to shine!
So my overview will be pretty biased because I did immediately upgrade her to E6. I've been waiting for her for a while, so I just had the crystals on demand, and like I said, with a new role, like in real life professionally, I just don't have the time to like scale through and play E0 Tenebria, then E2 Tenebria, then E4 Tenebria to give objectively correct analyses on each tier that you'd be pulling her for. So just remember that I am speaking from a place of essentially the highest power you can get from Tenebria. But from what I've seen online, like in Discord and Reddit, people seem very impressed with Tenebria even at 0 dupes. So I do think she is very worth pulling, and if you're willing to like power up all the way, this is kind of the start of Smilegate making a lot of very impactful high dupe gameplay effects. So if you've played since the beginning, you know that like a lot of the early release characters, you don't really care about the dupes, they already do their thing at E0. But with Hyde Marie, with Tenebria, and even with I think Adelheid, daughter, a lot of the characters are getting more and more reliant on their later egos because it fixes a really big flaw of their character kit. And the same is true for Tenebria, unfortunately, but just be aware of that. So, with all that said, before I get too distracted about talking about all the nitty-gritty things, let's go through a quick overview of her card set. So, Tenebria's mechanic, or her gameplay, will revolve around her rhythms, and these rhythms are going to be generated through music start. This card will activate immediately at the start of battle, and then it will give you rhythms depending on which epiphany you pick. So base epiphany, aka getting like +1 morale or whatever, you get the base rhythm, which is okay. Honestly, maybe I'll go through like a very more in-depth guide on Tenebria as the weeks go on after AX, because I do think that most of my videos will probably be built around her, besides new character releases. So I'm gonna like just gloss over her other rhythms, because honestly, as a comprehensive analysis, if I don't want to waste time on useless things, the only rhythm that's really worth talking about is going to be Arpeggio. And so the reason why Arpeggio ends up being the only relevant rhythm is because if you don't... I'll explain this a bit more in a second, but Arpeggio scales like Hyde Marie's Effulgent Release does. And again, if you don't know what that means, essentially that means that the stacked damage from the card text itself is actually its true base damage. So for example, with Hyde Marie, it says like, oh, you get more damage for each blade. That means they could stack that damage to some ridiculous like 100 blade count, and then when you get a multiplying buff, it would scale off of that 100 blade counted damage number. And so the same is true for Arpeggio, where you just generically get 6 rhythms, obviously, and so all of these numbers you see on screen, these aren't the real base numbers for Arpeggio. These should all be multiplied by 6. And obviously she has some other cards that might artificially inflate your rhythm counts if you're trying to min-max, but otherwise this ends up being much higher than expected. Like this Arpeggio 4, Arpeggio 5, these are actually 600% base damage without other things involved in her, kit. So just keep that in mind. And that's really important because we do have characters like Ray, who has access to stuff like Strike of Darkness. We have, or I'm not even sure Olia as a good support for her, but Olia has like Sortie, or Salty rather, in order to buff her up. And we don't even know what other characters might release in the future that would buff us up further. Another really big part of Arpeggio is that these are all Tenebria's own cards. If we look at the other music starts that exist, they will all say like create and give each ally 2 of their own rhythms, which is really bad because what ends up happening is that this means that these rhythms are not benefiting from Tenebria's ego skill, which is really expensive if you're not E6, or her partner. And that's a really big deal because obviously these are really, really powerful buffs for Tenebria, or for the rhythms in general. And there is an important note to where like these rhythms do recognize what type of character the combatant is. So if you get it on like a support, it is defense-based damage, so it's not as bad as it seems. But the issue is that it's not on your main carry. It's not on the character that you might have E6, who has massive buffs to rhythms at E6. It's on the character that has like, Scarab Set bonus, which buffs up your basic attack efficiency. It's on the character that you have all of your main equipment on, like there's so many like random like battle equips that just buff up your cards even more. So just keep that in mind. This is the reason why Arpeggio is the only real rhythm you want across the board in every form of content, unless you're going for some fun gimmick stuff with like Meilin, or just like trying to make Tenebria a support. But even if she is your quote-unquote support, odds are pretty high that Arpeggio is still the best one because it is the cheapest way to cycle your deck. And empty your hand of all, or empty your deck of all the arpeggios for your character that you're actually supporting. So just keep that in mind. So going into the rest of her cards, these are all support for these rhythms, or more cleanly, arpeggio. Spotlight is going to be a form of damage enhancement for Tenebria, and it's going to be a damage enhancement in the way that you are going to be activating Spotlight, or rather activating your arpeggios and rhythms more frequently. And so we can see here that on the right side we have the more like utility focused ones, whereas on the left side we have more like much more obvious like replay the card. The main, I think the main Spotlight that we really care about is going to be this middle one, the 2 AP Spotlight, where you can select and move up the 2 rhythm cards to your hand and then activate those rhythm cards. So this is really powerful because, again, as we noted earlier, Arpeggio has some crazy high damage. So the reason why this Spotlight is a lot more efficient than the one right next to it on the right, per se, is because this Spotlight, just by itself, costs a lot to be fair, but allows you to play Arpeggio 4 and 5 almost immediately. And even in Sortie, you can use this a bit more like or flexibly rather, where you can select, like Arpeggio 1 in order to pull out some more draw, along with Arpeggio like 3 or 4, which allows you to activate some other arpeggios in your hand. So this card has a lot of flexibility. It does really solid damage by itself. 441 is a lot. It gets past bosses and mechanics that punish you for playing too many cards, which the right 2 Spotlights would run you into. And overall, it's just a very high source of damage. And ours are pretty high that because you're playing Tenebria, your AP is very flexible because, again, if you're playing Arpeggio efficiently, you're burning very little AP to begin with, so Spotlight just ends up being playable even though the mana cost is really high. Now, the first skill, or rather the only skill Spotlight, is probably the more generically flexible one because it is costing 0. It does let you replay the arpeggios again and cycle through them more. But in gameplay, mainly in Sortie, this Spotlight does feel pretty underwhelming. I do think you can make this kind of okay because you get Divine Epiphanies on this to fix the draw problem a bit more. And if you're trying to make her more supporty, I do think between this 0 cost Spotlight and the one next to it, the skill one is probably nicer because you can force draw the arpeggios anyways. But there's probably a scenario where the rightmost Spotlight is potentially the best one because you can divine it into draw 1 common card and then just attempt to fish out all of your rhythms more efficiently. Or if you're running a lot of card draw anyways, discarding the non-rhythm cards is not relevant because it's a victim, whatever. Point is that Spotlight 3 and 4 are really the only ones we're talking about. And then moving on, Call and Response is going to be her rhythm fishing card. So this is one you're gonna take to draw or thin your deck a bit more. I think the most generically safe one is going to be the first one, just because it's kind of an effect that where you're not unhappy seeing it in general. The other call and responses are kind of conditional, so the second one does do really good damage, but unfortunately you would rather activate it immediately in the deck, so if you draw it, you're kind of unhappy. Same thing with the third one, where it needs to be in your deck before you play Rhythm, so that, you actually activate it, so if you discard it or draw it, it's bad. The fourth one is probably fun for a gimmick build where you go for a lot of rhythm hits, but you don't really... that's fine. I'm trying to look for a build where that's good, but I've not managed to get the Divine Epiphany set up for it yet. And the final call and response, unfortunately, there was one gimmick that I was really hoping would exist. Essentially the idea, this will be something that's more for the next Epiphany card or Tenebria card, but basically it says if in hand, it's treated as a rhythm card. Unfortunately, when you activate this card, it no longer is a rhythm card in the used card pile, so you can't actually cheese out this final call and response more frequently. It is, unfortunately, it's a really good hit. Don't get me wrong, it's a really good hit. It'll probably be very cheap when you play it, but it just ends up being a very good hit. And call and response, once again, is your main way of drawing into your rhythm cards very effectively. And keep in mind that because these are rhythm cards within your hand, that means you're also stacking on more base multipliers onto your arpeggios to scale them even higher than they should be, which is why this left one is genuinely quite good, because not only are you going to draw, empower your arpeggios, you're going to be more likely to draw into them because of the attunement effect. The next and final card that's really worthwhile in Tenebria's kit, the mythic card is kind of just delete whenever, is going to be Encore. So Encore is going to be another damage enhancing card in Tenebria's kit. Realistically, the really good one is going to be the middle one, because this middle one essentially gives you the control to double the best arpeggio cast you have. So this means that you can intentionally just use your 0 cost, 1 cost, and 2 cost arpeggios, 0 arpeggio 1, 2, 3 essentially. Get those out of your deck and then cast Encore to only empower your arpeggios 4 and 5 if you have the echoing versions of Spotlight, which is obviously quite powerful. There are different versions of Encore that are pretty equivalent. I would say the first Encore can end up being almost as good because you're essentially doubling up the arpeggio 5 twice. But just keep in mind that this middle Encore is 3 doubles, whereas this first Encore is technically only 1 double. And the best part about this middle Encore is that it does kind of pay for itself. Because if you looked at the arpeggios, you want to go back and check them out. Arpeggios 2 and 3 do not discount themselves, and so you very often like end up in a weird spot without this specific encore where it does cost you AP. So even though this encore does cost 1, odds are very high that you'll discount either 2 or 3, which will activate 2 or 3, ironically enough, in order for it to pay for itself, along with doubling it, and then obviously you'll have the AP for Spotlight to double echo the future card. And then the other spotlights, I think this second one, again, there probably is a world where like a lot of tiny hits with Tenebria is good, but she's never going to be the best at that. It is nice that they made a build for, pellet spitting Tenebria. And then Encores 3 or Encores 4 and 5. I think Encore 4 does have some niche effects where you can like really amp up a really strong hit by casting this at the end with all of your arpeggios in the graveyard, but probably not that relevant. There probably is another scenario where you could do something funny with Meilin, where you like have the Meilin Fortissimos, I think, in your graveyard and activate this to like make them all double, but that's getting ahead of myself. And the final Encore is probably the one that's good if you're going to try and go for a support Tenebria, because this allows you to draw all of your rhythms if you're lucky ahead of time and just get them out of your deck for very cheap. And being a draw one, unfortunately, this means you cannot divine this into a draw 2. You can make it a common draw 1 common, which will make it a 0 mana draw 2, and potentially even better if you get rhythm cards. So maybe, again, not saying that Tenebria is ever going to be a good support, but she could maybe support if you really were dedicated to using her in every single form of content in the game. And then the final card that, again, is pretty useless is going to be Photo Time. I thought this was an upgrade when I first saw it, so I thought it was going to be pretty good, but unfortunately it is a skill card, which means that at best this is going to be like a 10 hits hit, or 10 hit effect that requires you to have a prerequisite conditional, which is activating or drawing your rhythms, which is kind of hard to do in almost like if you're like unlucky with the draw order. And unfortunately, in the end, the effect is not very powerful because it is just 150% damage. Again, if you're at E6 Tenebria, ironically enough, the E2 effect is a lot more powerful than this card will ever be, because at E6, you can use the Photo Time or Photo Card, I think, and then your first Ego Skill is discounted, so you have a 4 EP 7 hit effect that also buffs your future rhythm cards, and then this card you have to draw into, and you can't play it like proactively to clear off, sortie 30 pings and all that, so it's very unfortunate. But yeah, ended up being a bit longer of an overview than I wanted to be, but basically those are all of her cards, and hopefully that gives some more context for the type of builds that I've been looking for. And yeah, as you might notice as I go through all of these decks, which are probably going to be pretty hard to see on the screen, unfortunately, the main thing is that like they are all arpeggio, but the reason why I want to go to the decks is because I want to highlight this particular divine for arpeggio. This is going to be at the start of each turn when this is the first card used, draw 2. Obviously, you're not getting the repeated value of playing this the first time each turn. That's really only possible for a character like Narja or Serenial anyways. But the reason why this is really nice is because this essentially means that your first turn, you have like a double Rocket Cape for free. So instead of having a 5-card draw, you have a 7-card draw, and you're guaranteed this effect because this card will automatically activate itself. This does deny you, again, the value from like a future Narja or Serenial draw 2 if first card played, but you can run those anyways if you're going to run that, strategy, and then just have Tenebria be the initial pump for the draw. And then outside of that, it's going to be the builds that I talked about. So like all these earlier builds, you'll see that this one was made 2 days ago. I think this is no, this is the correct one. So you can see that or was already going for Spotlight that selected and moved rhythm cards to hand. And yeah, and I think I have a lot of older ones. Like if it's like before the 28th, they're all the ones where I built them assuming that this original Spotlight was gonna be better. But after playing the Spotlight, the one that moves to, it does feel way stronger. Like this one ends up being a bit anemic and very susceptible to being hit by a boss that has extra action, which is very common this season. We'll see if it's common in season 4, but it's it's like not a great effect. Like again, it is very AP positive, and so if season 4 bosses don't punish you for extra actions, and once again, you're a Tenebria simp like I am, and you want to just use her in all content possible, this card will end up being your default regardless, I assume, but just know that if you're going for a pure DPS, this is kind of not the best in terms of efficiency, which, again, it's kind of unfortunate. But what this Zeta does have is probably the better effects you can get. So you can see that this is actually a Lab Zero seasonal deck, because I was trying to go for the, I think it was called Portrait of Hunger, the one that draws for each card. Draws one and draws more if you have a bigger hand. So I obviously ended up missing that one here, but you can see here that we have Foggy Crystal Ball, which increases your zero cost damage cards by 40%. Once again, with the proper Spotlight build and the proper call and response builds, you can have a lot more zero cost arpeggios, which means that you're getting a 40% amp on that. And then we have Eye of the Eyeless in Lab Zero as well, which is again another 40% damage amp. I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but each rhythm is considered a basic attack card, so it's another 40% amp. So you can see here, just on character equipment alone, this is an 80% multiplicative amp to all of our arpeggios, which is, again, quite disgusting. But obviously, if you want to play just the generic, Season 3 stuff, and you want to go for, these engravings, I think generically speaking, the engravings you want to go for is really this one when you have 15 more cards in the graveyard. It's a little ugly because you do have to get 15 cards into your graveyard, but once again, it really just depends on the content you're in. And there's always like the very generically safe, like when you increase the action count, get flat damage, which once again doesn't really work as well in Tenebria because she does have very strong multiplicative scaling and very whatever additive scaling, but you can take damage when you get it. Obviously, this won't work on the Great Rift boss or some random Season 3 monsters because they do have immunity to increasing their action count, which is a little weird for Season 3 considering what the entire theme's about in terms of deck building, but it is what it is, right? And also, Season 3 is ending pretty quickly, so this won't be that big of a deal going forward anyway. So we'll see what Tenebria gets as a deck option in the future. And at this part of the video, I just want to talk about the real reason why Tenebria is so fun and very versatile and a character you should be building. And that's mainly because of the fact that you do not have to delete your basic attack cards. So you can see here that on this deck, I have 4 gear bags and 1 divine encore, and I'm only at 140 points. This means that I also have persona, so I have 40 extra fate memory points to play with if I want to, which means that I can divine my call and responses to becoming even more efficient, or just divining my music start to fish for that draw 2 at turn start, or just do whatever I want realistically. I do have to remove photo time from this deck because again, it is kind of inefficient, but that's kind of what I mean by like some version of support Tenebria, where you can go a lot of gear bags, go a lot of temporary support values, just go something where she's like very beneficial for another character. Like she's very strong in draw while still having her own damage, essentially, is the idea for Tenebria. She's kind of like another version of a sub DPS like someone like Hugo is, and I do think that in the long run, Tenebria is a worse option as a sub DPS compared to Hugo, but sometimes you don't want to play Hugo, you want to play a cute girl, right? So that's the reason why I think Tenebria does have some small value when it comes to being a support, because again, she's not the best in supporting, but she's quite good. And then I guess it's like the last piece with Sortie. Once again, talking about the way that her. Oh, I think I failed my last Sortie run on the final boss because of my deck, which is bad. But actually, can you see the music start? Yeah, you can see that I lost this music start. Like speaking of how important arpeggio is, I got to the final boss in Hardcore 30, and I only lost because I clicked the very very bad. Never picked Fortissimo in Sortie. If I picked anything else, I probably would have cleared it. But the reason why I wanted to show this off was because I did end up having the Divine that you can't see on screen probably because it's not enlarging for some reason. But the Divine Epiphany in Sortie that says draw until 4 cards are in hand, that effect actually triggers before your actual card draw triggers at the start of turn. So this means that in Sortie, if you're playing without the -1 draw modifier, this gives you 9 cards guaranteed on turn 1 because you get forced to draw to 4 and then you draw 5 afterwards, which is pretty insane. And obviously, if you're on stage 30 or hardcore 30, you end up only drawing 8 cards because you have -1 card draw. But regardless, it is a pretty disgusting effect with how that works. And obviously, you can have like the orb to draw more, Rocket Cape to draw more. I didn't have any of that, but it is what it is. And yeah, hopefully this was a thorough enough review of Tenebria. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments. I did want to make this video a bit better edited, but running out of time, it is what it is. So I plan to make a lot more videos for her. I'm going to the future after AX. When I think Faye is the next character coming out, there will be like an initial review video for her after I play her a few times in Sortie and make a few decks for her. Unfortunately, not many Tenebria showcase videos this time around, just because, again, didn't have the time for it. But I'll be making up for that as time goes on by just, making her in Season 4 content. So we'll see how that goes. And hopefully YouTube doesn't demonetize me for the wallpaper here, but we'll see how that goes. Anyways, thanks for watching the video, guys. Have a good day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.